Hello, my name is Fernandes, and this is Connected, the podcast of Nova Economics Club. Today, our guest is Pedro Brinca, professor and researcher of macroeconomics at Nova SPE. Good afternoon, professor. For our first question, universal basic income has been discussed as a possible solution for negative labor demand shocks caused by AI-caused automation. What role of a UBI, what What role would a UBI have in this type of situation? And do you believe that, along with complementary measures, a UBI would be a sufficient answer for workers specialized in areas which were turned redundant by advancements in AI?
Okay, so regarding artificial intelligence and universal basic income, well, the first thing is try to understand what is it that it's similar and what is it that it's very different from what happened before. I mean, having technology disrupting labor relations is nothing new. I think it was Jonathan Hargreaves in the 18th century had to run away from his city after having invented the mechanic spinning wheel or something to use in the textile industry, which made huge improvements in the capacity of machines to build or to manufacture cloth, and thus decreasing the demand for manual workers. So the workers got together and tried to, they went to his house and trashed it, destroyed their shop and everything. And labor disruptions are not, or technology disruptions in labor relations is not something new. It's been there for a while. And we've all seen many professions disappear in the meanwhile, right? So what is it that it's different this time? Well, what's different this time is the speed at which this is happening, right? So before, this kind of technological transitions would take a while to make people, I mean, you had time to, you had a couple of generations through which all these adaptations would take place. But now, the degree at which innovation um, is happening, it's so fast that and so impactful that you have people that joined the labor markets in the 80s, in the 90s, that today they're obsolete. They had to complete change sectors even, and that's the big difference, is the speed at which things are happening. And COVID just accelerated it a lot. Okay, COVID just accelerated a lot. So everything that was coming from, having technology substituting people, think about going to the gas station, through the last 10, 15 years, you stop seeing people who fill up your gas tank. You have to come out and, service yourself with a ATM machine. Or if you go to McDonald's, now you have the tactile screens, so you have a lot less employees. With COVID, all of this, became much faster. And you can see that, for example, in the banking industry, where, people, especially when it comes to money, and especially older people, they don't like to use the internet because they are afraid of getting conned and stuff. But now with COVID, they had no other option, so they had to do it. So they were forced to adopt digital technology, right? And the thing about this is that, if COVID can go away, but they don't forget, how to use online banking anymore because they were forced to use it. So, what you see in the banking industry are huge labor restructuring happening because all of a sudden you don't need as many agencies because all of a sudden you don't have as many clients wanting face-to-face contact. So that's one. I mean, you can also see a similar pattern for the pharmaceutical industry, where the medical delegates, they are also dwindling, by the numbers. Before all these technologies of remote conference calls and stuff like that, I mean, they existed, but people had never been forced to use them. And, being forced to use something has, revealed itself to be quite effective at adopting those platforms. And now, a lot of the talks between medical delegates and medical doctors happens precisely through platforms like Zoom or Teams or Skype or whatever, because now they are ubiquitous. I mean, everyone knows them and everyone uses them. So they're also scaling down a lot the number of workers they have working as delegates. Now, so COVID accelerated this a lot. Now, the idea of the universal basic income comes under the idea that all these advancements, they happen in a way that render work kind of, less and less and less important, and thus what's going to happen is that there won't be jobs for everyone. So I'm not a very big kind of fan of that reading, because I don't think we are anywhere near of having some fantastic AI technology that can just be our slaves and pamper us throughout all our lives. I think there are plenty of jobs for that are needed, for which you can't have machines or algorithms substituting for. So as long as people have some sort of mobility, as long as people can be reskilled, they will find jobs in other sectors. And there are sectors who are increasing labor demand. Okay. So geriatric care, for example, is one of them, right? So Western population is aging. You need more and more people to take care of old people. You can't really have a computer yet doing that. You might have in the future, but not so much for now. So, until the day comes when you have those humanoids that you can't distinguish from a real person and that has the same level of creativity and, can substitute us completely, I don't think that, that labor Armageddon is to be worried about, at least not in the next, I don't know, 50 years or something at least. So, universal basic income. So, what kind of problem it aims to solve? I mean, there are many problems and advantages, many problems that universal basic income would solve. I already said that I don't think that technology and AI is one problem that needs to be solved at the moment. It is a problem that needs to be solved to kind of reskill people from some sectors where they became redundant into other sectors. That's a key thing. But I don't think that universal basic income actually facilitates that. On the opposite, right? It can actually create incentive for people not to be reskilled. So I don't think that is a problem. I see other things where some sort of universal basic income policy would be useful, which is, for example, we spend a lot of resources on compliance, on seeing if you are eligible for some program, and then controlling if people are abusing the system. I mean, all these things. I mean, they could be taken care of with a uniform policy that doesn't need supervision, because it's the same thing for everyone, regardless of what you do. So there are some resource gains there of not having to monitor a very complex system of giveaways and transfers. But then there's the other side of the coin too, which is some of the reasons why we have all of this is because we believe that some people have different needs than others, right? So you don't want to, I mean, do we want a society where you give, a handicapped person the same kind of support you give to someone who doesn't have any, um, you know, issues or problems? So that's number one. And then number two, which is the big elephant in the room, which is how much universal basic income can we afford, right? So I did some math and just think about it. For the US, let's say that universal basic income would start at $1,000. That's nothing in the US. That's nothing. I mean, your low income, if you make 3,000, 2,000, you're relatively low income in the US. So getting $1,000 as universal basic income, that would consume almost 80% of the federal budget, which means, I mean, you would get rid of every other social program, right? Um, but still, it's 80% of the federal budget. Think about defense, think about, other things that you can't really rely on an individual with resources given by the universal basic income to address. And you quickly see that the kind of taxation that you would have to have in order to have such a policy would have to increase a lot. And with those distortions and loss of efficiency. So yeah, I'm not 100% sure that it's even feasible in that sense. So the answer would be on those two accounts. The first is I don't think that AI or other technologies came to a point where, they render all types of labor, redundant. Plenty of people have plenty of stuff to do. Even if you have, robots doing stuff, you need someone to program the robots, to maintain them, all of that stuff. So, and the second thing, yes, we would save some resources on not having a monitoring system, checking eligibility, all that stuff. But the level of universal basic income that you would expect, such that you wouldn't be deterred from implementing it, from the fact that a lot of people who have specific needs wouldn't have them covered, let's say, as I said, $1,000 a month, is completely fiscally unfeasible. You would have to raise taxes by a whole lot. So I'm not a big kind of, I'm not that excited about universal basic income. I don't think that it's such a hot topic idea just yet. Maybe it will in the future if we have those kind of disrupting technologies. But for now, I'm a bit skeptical about it.
Okay, thank you for your answer. For our second question, let's talk about inflation. Another possible side effects of ABI is an increase in national expenditure, which could lead to inflation. What are some of the possible solutions for this problem?
Well, it's only inflation to the point. I mean, there's two sources of inflation there. First is, how do you get these people to get $1,000? If it's just tax and transfers, you might get some inflation that comes from redistribution and the poor people having a higher marginal propensity to consume and therefore saving less, put higher pressure on prices. But I don't think that would be the relevant margin, or maybe it will. I don't know. That's a quantitative question. Another thing, I mean, for sure. I mean, if you start printing money to pay for that, then yes, no doubt you'll have inflation. I mean, we saw that. Are we seeing that now, actually, during COVID, right? The government printed money up to 25% of GDP. Well, printed. I shouldn't say printed, but the government distributed money up to 25% of, or 25% of GDP for discretionary spending for the support of the economy. And now we see everyone starting to worry a lot about inflation. So yeah, how to avoid that? Well, don't do it. So that's what I would say. um, but I guess inflation I wouldn't expect inflation to be an issue if it's a mere redistribution mechanism, right? So you maintain the level of taxes, and then you just take tax revenues and you give everybody the same lump sum transfer. I don't see inflation being a problem there. What I see is that the level of that transfer would be too small for it to be politically feasible to end all the other social programs. Or you can increase that amount, but then you would have to increase a lot tax rates and taxation. So that's what I think about it.
Okay, thank you for your answer. And for a final question, the mayors of the cities of LA and Chicago have created pilot monthly cash payment programs to help lower income families. What is your outlook of the fiscal preparation the EU has in accordance with this type of programs? And do you believe that a UBI should be implemented in the EU as soon as possible or whenever the necessity arises? As for example, what you're talking about AI.
Well, so those pilot programs, it's not like, are they really universal? I mean, is it like that, everyone in LA or
No,
Chicago is getting it?
they're means tested.
Yeah.
They're means tested.
So there you go. There goes the universal out of the window. Um, and the other, I mean, the other type of programs, we already have them, right? Like the minimum guaranteed income. I mean, we have a lot of those things. The problem with means tested programs like that, is that in order to fund them, you need to increase taxes, and increasing taxes have distortionary effects and impairs and decreases efficiency in the economy. So it is true that you divide the cake by more, but you have a smaller cake to divide. Now, this is a positive statement. There's nothing normative about it. Normative is expressing a political position where you say, I don't mind the cake being smaller as long as it's better divided. And I would say that for some levels of inequality, everyone would agree. For some levels of inequality, everyone would disagree. And then depending on wherever you are in that spectrum, you'd be more or less prone to, sacrifice that efficiency in favor of, greater equity. I should also say that it's not obvious that such trade-off is linear and immutable. You can find situations where you can decrease inequality and increase efficiency and growth, especially in developing countries. In developed countries, I'm not so sure. But in developing countries, sure, there is scope to increase both equality and efficiency. But should they be implemented? I mean, it's a case by case, and universal basic income means many different things to many different people. So, are we going to go up with a flat tax rate, substituting it or not? For example, and are we dropping out every other transfer programs like Social Security and all the other kind of support systems that exist? Do we drop them or not? So it's too much of a general question to have just such a definite answer, right? Because it depends on a lot on this all of these details. But in this purest form, I think the biggest problem to it is that the universal basic income that could be supported from the current tax structure would be too low to be politically feasible. Because, I mean, that's the math I did for the US, right? $1,000 means 78% of the federal budget. So I don't think under those kind of values that it would make sense to have such a program. But yeah, that's what I would say.
Okay, thank you for your answers. This concludes our interview. Thank you for coming, Professor Brinca.
Thank you.